Hey guys, welcome to Taste of Recovery, the podcast,
where we explore one's honest journey of surrender, willingness, acceptance, and courage.
I'm Alicia Spenlove.
And I'm Eden Sassoon.
Please join us every week for authentic and raw conversations with inspiring people in recovery.
We invite you and our guests to get real because the disease of addiction does not discriminate.
Oh, no, it doesn't. And we go through so many emotions. We laugh, we cry, we pray.
So get ready for a taste of recovery.
It wasn't because I was loaded that I turned into a monster. It was because you were trying to stop me from getting loaded.
Hey, Sober Gangsters. Let's welcome Jason to the studio today.
Enjoy his taste of recovery.
So tell us, how did Sober Gangster come about?
Sober Gangster is my light and my dark. My sobriety is my light, right? Like, I get to have this light. I get to have this freedom in my life today that I didn't have before. And the gangster is my dark, and that dark still exists, even in recovery. And sometimes I do dark things in recovery. Sometimes I don't take care of myself. Sometimes I don't date the right person, or I date too many people, or I use sex to feel better, or I use food to feel better, or I use sitting on the couch and watching Netflix, things that don't feed the white wolf, but things that feed that dark wolf. And so I always have the dark and the light. And for me, that's what that Sober Gangster represents. I'm always going to carry this light side of me, and I'm always going to carry the dark side. The solution I found when I first got sober, which I should mention, I got sober October 12th of 1996. So I was 19 years old. I've been sober 27 years from all mind-altering chemicals. And the solution I found when I got sober, and that foundation I built when I first got sober, is still the same foundation that I fall back to no matter what. Whenever I need to get into when people say, do the work, what is the work? Like, what does that even mean? And for me, that work is, I found my recovery and my solution and my spiritual experience or psychic change through the mechanism of the 12 steps. And when I need to get back into the work, and I'm back into the work right now, I'm starting over on my 12 steps because I wanted to take some stuff. Like I said earlier, I haven't been as connected. If I want to get reconnected again, or if I want to have a psychic change for some behaviors, there's a lot of things I've tried in between: counseling, yoga, meditation, working out. Like, I do all that too. But at the core of me, the solution I've found is through that mechanism of the 12 steps that facilitates a spiritual experience or a psychic change. And when I do that work, something happens in my life. But sometimes it's really hard to get willing to do that work. And so I get to roll around in the dark as long as I want, as long as I just don't use. And that's been my, for the last 27 years, like, no matter what happens in my life, I know I can't use because I know where I'm going to go if I use. Doesn't matter if I had a year sober or 27 years sober, I will go back to the same spot.
Do you have a sponsor at 20? Do you still have a sponsor?
Yeah, I have a sponsor.
So
I sponsor other men, and I have a sponsor.
Being sober for 27 years, it would think that it's almost second nature for you by doing the work that you can't go very long without doing it or without being in it, or it's a part of your cellular makeup at this point. Or maybe that I'm wrong. I don't know. I guess I'm questioning what that looks like.
I think for me, like, what happened, I get to have these spiritual experiences. Like, when I went through the work, and something happened every time I do that. And when I have those spiritual experiences, psychic changes, like, I use verbiage depending on what people experience. When I have a psychic change, I get relief. I get relief from whatever I was dealing with. I get relief from the void that I was feeling. I get relief from the darkness that I was using to fill that void. I get relief from my behavior. But when that relief comes, now I get to live in that relief for a while. But then something new happens, or some other life calamity, or some other self-imposed crisis. Because sometimes it's self-imposed because of my behavior. Sometimes it's self-imposed as an employee and I decide to be a bad employee. Sometimes I have these self-imposed crises due to my ego. And now I have to figure out how to make it through that without destroying my life. Once I did the work and that compulsion to drink was removed, because it has been, like, the compulsion and obsession for me has been removed from my life. That is not something that comes up anymore. There's a lot of other dark shit that still comes up when I'm in a dark place. So making it through that other stuff, when I get to that point, I have to fall back into that work. But sometimes that relief, sometimes that psychic change allows me to like ride it out for a while until something new comes up. And then it's time to get back into the work.
I think it's important. Sorry to cut you up, but important for people who are listening, because we do talk about drugs and alcohol a lot. And I'm with you where that obsession's been lifted, but like the other shit that comes up is the problem. And it's like affects every part of my life. And sometimes people are like thinking recovery is just drugs and alcohol when it's so much more than that. So if you want to go into that, having 20 years of sobriety as far as being, abstinent from drugs and alcohol, like what does that other stuff look like?
Well, I think for me, and I think it's important, like, and I talk about it a lot, like there is truly a solution to be free from the disease. Whether you think it's a disease or not, there's a solution to be free from the mental obsession and the physical obsession and compulsion that I experienced when I was in active addiction. And so first and foremost, like that's all that mattered, was getting free of that, whatever it took, figuring out how I could become free from that obsession and compulsion. And there is a solution out there. I found it for me through the 12 steps. I think there's other solutions out there now that are becoming more prevalent that can help people too. And however you find it, there is a way out. Once you've discovered that way out, it's like, now life happens. Like, I've been married and divorced 3 times. Like I'm in my 3rd marriage right now. When you have a divorce, it's heartache. Deaths, friends in recovery that don't make it in this program, like, loss of jobs, loss of money, loss of houses, loss of, and I have 3 kids. And, when you have kids, that means you've got the roller coaster of making sure your kids survive being teenagers. And, when all that stuff happens, it's like, you got to be able to utilize for me, I've had to utilize what I've been taught in order to still walk a spiritual path and still be able to show up for everybody else around me while also maintaining my recovery. The recovery is still number one. Like I've told anybody that's in my life at an intimate level, if I decide I can have a glass of wine like a normal person at dinner one night, pack your shit, close out the bank accounts, get as far away as you can, because I will destroy everything. So my number one priority is always my recovery. As long as I stay sober through whatever calamity is happening, I can do the work on it. I can make it through everything else.
Yeah. And also you were saying how there have been long periods where you haven't been doing the work and get caught up in just sort of mundane things like watching too much Netflix and like eating too much sugar.
Well, and it's so crazy how easy it is. Like I've found and I travel so much for my job. I'm all over the country a lot, and it's so easy as soon as I get on the road to order a large pizza and eat Ben and Jerry's alone in my hotel room for 3 nights in a row. And then all of a sudden I just feel like a sloth and soft and lonely and sad. And it's so easy for me to just hop up and go to a 12-step meeting and I feel a little better, and then hit the gym and I feel a little better, and then order my meat bowl from Chipotle and I feel a little better. And then, go do a cold plunge and I feel great. Like all these little things that it can flip so fast just by feeding that white wolf, I like to call it. Like if I feed the things that I know fuel me and spiritually connect me and align me, it comes back really quick. But I can choose to feed the dark wolf sometimes. And sometimes, like I had to learn quite a while, probably at like 15 years sober, I think it was. It's kind of, for me, it sticks. There's a lot of comparison of how I feel on the inside to what everybody else looks like on the outside. You can be sitting in a 12-step room, you can be sitting in work, but like what I used to compare, like, oh my God, that guy has so many sponsees and he's only got 3 years sober. What am I doing? Or this guy's worked the steps 14 times and he's got 6 years sober. Like, I didn't give myself a lot of grace. And there was a point when I was about 15 years sober where it was like, everybody's journey is different. We all have, like, I can't rob somebody of their journey. Nobody can rob me of my journey. And I used to beat myself up about like how I felt on the inside versus how everybody else, like, especially in the social media world, like I get to compare how everybody else looks on the outside and not really know what they're going through. And so once I started introducing like some grace into my life, you know, when I would go through those lower lows, it's okay. It's just a moment of time. I have a solution out of it. When I'm ready to get into that solution, when I'm ready to reach my hand out and ask my higher power for some help, and when I'm ready to do that work, it's there. But sometimes that willingness, sometimes I just have to wait for the willingness to come. And sometimes that stuff that doesn't fuel the light, allows me to get through it a little bit. And so there is a balance of light and dark sometimes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
You have to give yourself a break, you know?
Yeah.
It's okay to, I don't know, get in bed and take a nap and curl up and just,
The acceptance of it, I think for me would be key. And then know that the solution's there and it's
learn to clear your mind again, however that is, meditate or go take a walk.
Yeah, take action, different contrary action. Duh. How did you get to even...
instead of taking a drink or whatever, you know?
Well, that's not an option.
No, not an option at all.
Well, for me, I had to, my last drink was not my worst bottom. I had so many bottoms up until that point. So many overdoses, jail, that, like all the things. I spent most of my juvenile life in some sort of locked up facility. I think I was in 7 or 8 rehabs before I was 18. I turned 18 in juvie. Like, I went to prison when I was 19. So, like, I spent most of my life hitting bottom, my teenage years hitting bottoms over and over again.
What were you doing?
My last drink was...
Like, I just need to know, were you like trouble, fighting, stealing, selling, the whole nine?
I was a drug addict alcoholic. Like, the first time I tasted alcohol and I got drunk, I threw up and I fell down the side of a mountain and got bloody and I got caught. So the first time I drank, it was
red flag.
A disaster.
Right.
And that was basically the story of my career. Like, every time I always got caught. I was always the guy that went to jail. I always got in trouble. And I remember that next day after getting in trouble, getting bloodied, throwing up on myself, all I wanted to do was, how am I going to do this again?
So at 14, your first drink happened and all this.
The doors opened.
The doors opened and it was just
it was instantaneous for me. It was on me because for me, growing up, I was bullied as a kid, picked on, beat up, and never felt a part of, never part of the cool kids club. And as soon as alcohol touched my mouth, all of that went away. I felt a part of, I felt funny, I felt strong.
And then did you find a friend group too?
Yeah, and I had a core friend group that we all did it together. And then the next morning, all I wanted to do was do it again. And my poor parents were like, and in the matter of a few weeks, like, what happened to my sweet, nice Jason? It turned into just the Jekyll and Hyde. Like, I turned it in. This is something that I've also recently discovered around 15 to 20 years sober. I talk about that Jekyll and Hyde a lot. Like, I turned into a monster once I was in active addiction. A lot of times that monster came out when I was sober, though. It wasn't because I was loaded that I turned into a monster. It was because you were trying to stop me from getting loaded. And so most of the time when I was this awful person, violent, robbing people, doing whatever I needed to do to get high, It's because I wasn't high yet. And then once I got high, I was fine. I was a good time, life of the party. Let's go get more drugs. But as soon as I ran out, and as soon as you tried to stop me from getting more, whether it was the police, whether it was my parents, I turned into that.
I just had an aha moment. Thank you so much. For some reason, I just had something I've heard 100 times, but you said it differently. And I'm like, whoa. Like, okay, yeah, you make your worst decisions sober, but like, you just made it clear. And then I was like, well, so when you take away the drugs and you're sober, that behavior is still there, right? You're still irritable, discontent, and like, so that's where this is me being the work comes in and the behavior starts to change and you work on it and you have your psychic spiritual change.
Yeah. And that's where that dark is. Like that dark is still like I was dark without being loaded. Like as soon as I got my drugs and alcohol, the void, whatever I was like, it was filled. There was a void filled with drugs and alcohol. But when I didn't have that, when I wasn't using and I was trying to figure out how I was going to get loaded, that's when that's when the violence came out. That's when I assaulted my parents. That's when I robbed people. That's when I, did all the horrible things. And I was dead sober trying to get drugs. And I didn't realize that till like 15 or 20 years sober. I was like, I'm full of shit. I did all of this trying to wait a minute. I was sober when I was doing this. And I was like blown away. But that last drink, it wasn't some massive disaster of like, I'm crawling on the ground begging for help. I had been sober for 6 months. I'd just gotten out of prison. My life was going good. I was somewhat active in the fellowship. No, I didn't have a sponsor, but I was showing up to the 12-step program. I had a cute little fellowship girlfriend because that's what you do. So a friend of mine just called me up and he's like, hey, I'm going to a party tonight. Do you want to come? And I was like, you know what? Alcohol was always the thing that took me out. I didn't even like drinking that much. I wasn't a drug user. Once I discovered drugs, that's what I focused on. And drinking was like, okay, if there's not drugs around, I'll drink because that's, but whenever I drank, I always drank to the point of vomiting all over myself, passed out somewhere in a gutter. So it wasn't necessarily fun. Where with drugs, I could go for weeks at a time and use all the drugs I want and be, loaded as consistently as I wanted to be. And so I was like, yeah, I'll come to this party. It sounds good. I've been sober for a while. My life's great. I got a good job. So I showed up and he's like, good to see you. I've known this guy since I was 3 years old. I'm still friends with him. He's like, good to see you. Here's want a beer, and handed me a Heineken. It's like, you know what? I'm a 19-year-old kid. I should be able to have a beer because that's what 19-year-olds do. And I had a beer, and 3 hours later, I was back in handcuffs.
Oh, shit.
Facing a parole violation and with 12 years over my head. And it only took 3 hours from that first drink. And I got a DUI. I got a driving without privileges. My friend had his butt kicked and was bloody in the seat next to me. Again, the story of my life. He took a taxi home. I went to jail because that's what always happened to me. And I was sitting in that jail cell and I had what people like to call a burning bush experience, where it was like, you can never drink like a normal person. And in that moment, it wasn't a horrible bottom. I'd been to jail a lot. I've done a lot worse in my life. I like to say that last drink was the bottom that mattered. It was the one that counted. And I got out the next day. I called my parole officer. I went in to see him. I told him what I did. And he's like, since you came to me and you were honest, I'm not going to violate your probation. But I was a 19-year-old kid getting ready to get shipped back off to prison in Nevada for 12 years because I decided to drink. And that was October 12th or October 11th of 96. And October 12th is my sober date.
So what happened next? Where did you go to get sober? How did you do it?
I had been to so many rehabs at this point. I had a very good understanding of what I had a very good understanding of my disease. And so I already had a community within 12-step program. And so I went straight back to my community and I got honest and I followed the suggestions. I got a sponsor. I did what he told me to do. I became a part of. That was my only community. I didn't do things outside of that community. I was very much ingrained in a 12-step world for quite a few years. But I do think it's important to mention, once I started to get that relief and the freedom through the solution I found in the 12-step programs, I didn't get sober to not live. And so eventually I started to live outside of the 12. I started to make friends that weren't in recovery. I started to do things outside of recovery. I also believe, like, my relationship with my higher power isn't one where he wants me, my higher power wants me to just sit there writing inventory 12 hours a day. And that's where I said, sometimes I don't do some of that work. Sometimes I've found this freedom to where I have an intuitive notion of what the right thing is to do now, the longer I've stayed sober. Like, the longer I've stayed sober, the miracles, the psychic changes, like the gifts, like, I live such a life of abundance and freedom, and so many people in my community that, you know, great relationships with people. I have friends that I've had for 27, 30 years through the recovery community that we're still great friends. And so I have this amazing life of abundance and friendships and love and relationship with my higher power. And the longer I've stayed sober, like, it continues to compound. Like, it keeps getting better and bigger. And even when those hard times come, and there have been tragedies along the way, like, I'm able to make it through those tragedies in a stronger way, and I'm able to show up in a different way and instinctively know what I need to do to make it through that. Like, my first thought isn't to go knock somebody out. It might be I need to call a friend before I go knock somebody out. Like, that instinct comes quicker than it did when I first got sober. I'm so grateful for, like, the gift I was given through somebody being willing to show me how to do this and following those directions and having that solid foundation that's allowed me to apply it in my life over and over again whenever life happens, because it continues to happen.
I have a question about your relationship. Where's your relationship in your higher power within your relationships? Does that make sense?
I think it's a great question. And I think that goes back to, like, I have the choice to roll around in the mud as long as I want. Mm-hmm. And there's people that probably listen to this that aren't part of a 12-step program. Those that are part of a 12-step program know what I'm talking about. When you do this work, you know, you do your 4-step, and then you get to write all the things out, and you get to really see the truth of who you are and the truth of some of that darkness. And then you get to share it with somebody else. But part of a 4-step is what's called a sex inventory, and you get to see your relationships. It's called the sex inventory, but it really is your relationships with women, and how that, for me, it's my relationships with women. And I live this life of, well, I don't have issues with women. Women like me, my ex-girlfriends, even if I'm just having, like, sleeping with women, I still am a nice guy. I'm honest. Mm-hmm. There is a way to turn anything into light or dark. I can take the truth and use the truth for dark. I can take the truth and use it for light. And I got really good at, like, spinning my truth to get what I want and be able to justify it by, well, I'm telling the truth. I'm being honest that there's never going to be a relationship, that I don't want to have a long-term commitment with you. If you want to hook up every once in a while, that's fine. And so you have, like, I had ways to justify my behavior based off of how I was utilizing, you know, my truth. And it took a long time for me to hit a bottom with my relationships and do that real work and do that, again, the foundational work that I found when I got here, and get back into doing a true sex inventory where I got honest with myself, another man, and shared it with my higher power, and had the opportunity to go make amends to people where I needed to. And through that work, you start to discover, patterns. And my relationship with my higher power did not get me sober to live in fear. and did not remove my obsession and compulsion to live in fear. I go around people partying. I go to bars. I wear my Sober Gangster hat at the bar, and I go out and I have fun. And it's funny, like if I'm around people that are drinking and they actually drink to the point where they're starting to get drunk, like the sillier they get, the sillier I get, but I'm sober. Like my inhibitions kind of go down a little bit because their inhibitions are down a little bit. And so it didn't matter if we happened to be going out with friends that drank. I would go spend time with my wife and go.
But let me be clear to those that are listening. I heard those that are listening that maybe just tuned in or maybe not, whatever. You did say that for the first years, 3-4 years sobriety,
yes.
You did not.
Yes.
So
no.
Let's just be clear. He's had many, many years of sobriety, and it took him, a lengthy time to get.
I think
there.
the most important thing is when that obsession was removed, when I did the work, and when I say the work, when I worked through the 12 steps and had it says, and when I do these things that are outside of the 12-step program, I try to be very mindful of the traditions. But the 12 steps said, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. Or you can change that to say, having had a psychic change as a result of these steps. So if you do that work, it tells you this will happen. Something will happen if you get to step 12. I don't know what it's going to be, but something's going to happen. So when I did that work, something happened. Somewhere along the line, I had formed a relationship with my higher power. I had psychic changes, and I found freedom from that obsession.
That's smart.
Mm-hmm.
I did a trip in Mexico a couple of years back with my wife, and it was her friends from high school. So there was like 8 of them, and back to back and it's awful, but I haven't smoked for like 15 years either. I was able to quit smoking at some point. Everybody was vaping. I was like, you know what? It was just like, it's almost just like a relapse. I was like, I've never done that before. I want to try that.
Oh,
and I was like, let me try that vape. I've always seen them. I tried a vape. I have been stuck on a vape for like 2 years now.
Whoa.
From one hit of a vape. And again, it's like that realization
I'm
of like.
So glad you shared that. Thank you.
Well, and I've given myself grace about it. Like it's working for me now. I'm not hurting people.
Okay,
like,
but I'm going to just, as your friend,
but
like, when are you going to quit that shit?
Actually, it's so funny. I quit June 1st. I put the patch on and went a few days, and I'm like, okay, I can do this. And then had a graduation weekend. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to. I'm going to just.
Right.
Like, it's going to be here within the next
right.
few weeks. I'll be
happening.
off of it. It's not like something I'm obsessing about or beating myself up over. It is what it is. But it was so fascinating to me to like have that one hit.
Okay, this is interesting. This is the stupidest thing ever.
Okay, wait. It's
What?
the act, but he's not blowing his life up.
No, but it's the behavior, right? So that's what he's saying. Like I go for the hit and then I took it. Something felt good. It's the whatever's in that stuff.
Yeah,
and
it
you're
felt
like,
good.
now you're in
It
it.
was-
Now
yeah.
you're in the act.
Yeah, true.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's the behavior behind it, because it could have been a drug or a drink or a pizza or a boy or money or, it's,
And the same thing happens to me with pizza or with like,
me too.
I'm pretty like healthy about like I try to live a healthy lifestyle and go to the gym. I go to the gym 6 days a week. I go to yoga, I meditate. And I try to eat right. Food is like my utter enemy. Like I will do good for 3 months. And then all of a sudden I'll go on the road by myself and be like, I'm going to have a piece of pizza. It got to the point where it's like 3 pizzas by myself and it goes for a week. And all of a sudden I gained 30 pounds and I'm like, what happened? And so the same thing can happen to me with food. Out of relationships, you brought up relationships earlier, like a divorce happens and the loneliness kicks in, the Eeyore syndrome. Like if I lost my tail and if I found it, I'd lose it again anyway. And so like, but then some pretty woman gives me attention and all of a sudden I'm sleeping with 10 women and feel empty inside, but I'm filling the void with something for a minute until it hurts bad enough. And then I have to go address it and do the work and try to figure out why I do that over and over again. And it's a lot easier to do some of that stuff because the bottom isn't as bad.
Yeah.
I think it's hard when, it's when you hit a bottom, and I've hit bottoms in recovery. I hit a bottom at 15 years sober where just the option to drink wasn't there, but the other horrible options were.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you hit a bottom in recovery, it's a heavy thing. And it's a lot of that behavior of like feeling so empty inside, but you're sober.
And you're aware of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. Life. Wow.
It's so good. I called my sponsor the other day. I'm like, I'm convinced food is the devil and he's trying to get me. And he's like, all right, let's talk about this. I'm like, no. I got to talk to God. I got to go. Like, cause this is some real shit. And it's sin. Like I am at the point where the food, that obsession of the mind with the food is sin. And if I can stay because of my relationship where I'm at with God is we're working through it. We're like, thank you, God, right? The love is real. And then the devil comes in and creeps in and fights. And I'm like, no, you're not invited here. It's not talking anymore. Like there is some higher power here that's taking care of this situation because in my mind, give me more. It's like, it's
so funny though. Cause like the 12 steps are a mechanism for me to have some sort of spiritual experience or psychic change.
Mm-hmm.
And I utilize the 12 steps to find freedom from drinking and drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that as I've never applied it to food in my life. Are you kidding me?
Right.
But I struggle with food.
Right.
I struggle with food.
Yep. It's always interesting to hear other people's issues about food because everyone has them. For some reason, people feel like we can't talk about food addiction when we're talking about alcohol or drugs. For me, it's almost the same, if not worse, because I have to live with it day to day and my choices. Like every day I have a choice.
I think that's some of the cool stuff that comes along as we stay sober. It was like, eat the food, eat the sugar, drink the coffee, smoke the cigarettes, just don't drink.
Right. I think you can find a beautiful balance.
I think it's changed. I think that's part of the dynamic that's shifting in the recovery community.
I hope so.
Having a healthy diet will also help you just not use because you feel good about yourself. Like it starts to become.
Yeah, it's another tool.
Yeah.
Right? In our culture, growing up and out there now, alcohol is everywhere and it's just
sexy and fun. And
oh yeah, you can't like dance or do anything unless you're, have a little good buzz or champagne buzz. Let's celebrate. But now there's all these sober drinks and there's sober, merchandise that Sober Gangster. Yeah. We can all be a sober gangster. We can all be a sober sister. I mean,
the dialogue and language is changing.
Yeah.
It's so crazy to see how much it's changed from when I got sober. And I've always been pretty outspoken in my recovery to where I've like in the 12-step world have gotten some slack. If somebody asks why I don't drink, I don't make up, like I've always been pretty open about it, but it's been so cool to see it, the dynamic shift so much over the years. And it's drastic from when I got sober to today, how acceptable it is to be somebody in recovery. And it, like I said earlier, almost admired by just normies that they don't want to drink anymore either, but it's just so socially, that's what you do.
It's celebrated now. Yeah. It's celebrated.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
If someone is hesitant about AA and they're curious about the Recover Out Loud world, or they're wanting to be sober curious. They're wanting to buy your Sober Gangster hat. What are some ways that young people, anyone that
seduce them into joining us?
Yeah, could join our world. No, I mean, what are some parting words where you can give some encouragement to people that may be afraid to look into AA? What could they look into?
I think that's the really cool part of what I'm seeing happening right now, because I've always, when I have recovered out loud, there are so many people that I've come across that won't walk through the doors of the 12-step program. And I always wonder, like, what happened to them? Like, if they can't get through the doors of a 12-step program, they should have an option of other areas to find a solution. And I think right now there are so many options out there for people that want to experience or dip their toe in their water or explore an alcohol-free lifestyle or start exploring recovery. Like, one of the most important things for my recovery was having that community of people that supported and loved each other, that were all on the same path of trying to find a better way of life. And because there's times, throughout my recovery, throughout the 27 years, it could have even been as recent as last year, that I've needed to lean on that community to make it through whatever I was going through at that time. And not only the hard times, but living life, having fun, going out and doing all the things. I want to party my ass off sober. Like, I party my ass off sober. I want to dance. I want to camp. I want to do all the things that I always dreamed about that I could never do when I was in active addiction. And that's what those communities bring.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope these stories have touched your hearts and left you with a newfound appreciation for the incredible strength within us all.
And if you found our podcast to be a source of inspiration, we'd be extremely grateful if you could take a moment to rate and review us.
Yes, review us.
Your support helps us reach more people on the path to recovery.
And while you're at it, hit that follow button on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Remember, you're not alone. One day at a time, we got this.